My name is Nora Caldwell. I am 68 years old, a retired librarian, and a widow who once believed that love and sacrifice were enough to hold a family together. For most of my life, I kept the records of others, books, histories, stories that outlived their owners. But no one prepares you for the moment your own child tries to erase your story. That night, I sat quietly in the corner of a glittering ballroom, my cane resting against the chair, my late husband's wedding band strung around my neck. My daughter Melissa was radiant in a sequined dress, her arm looped through the man she planned to marry. The chandeliers spilled light on her as if she were a queen. The music slowed, the chatter hushed, and she raised her champagne glass high. "Tonight," she declared, "I want to thank the person who made all this possible." My mother. She trusted me enough to sign away her $2.3 million home so I could build a future for us all. Applause broke out across the room. Heads turned toward me, expecting me to smile, to nod, to play the role of the frail mother who had stepped aside for her ambitious daughter. I did not clap. I did not move. My hands remained folded in my lap, fingers brushing the edge of a sealed envelope I had carried with me all evening. I could still feel the weight of those words from months before. My daughter tricked me into signing away my $2.3 million home. I stayed silent. I had chosen silence, not weakness, but patience. Silence because I understood something Melissa did not. That truth, when revealed at the right moment, is louder than any outburst. The applause faded. Melissa leaned closer to the microphone, her eyes shining with triumph. "She believed in me," she said, pointing toward me. "She handed everything over, and I turned it into our future." I rose slowly, leaning on my cane. My steps echoed against the marble floor as I walked to the center table. Gasps fluttered through the guests, whispers following me like a tide. I set the envelope down, slid out a single crisp document, and smoothed it across the white tablecloth. "Melissa," I said, my voice steady though my chest burned with years of swallowed disappointment. "You told them I signed everything over. But perhaps they should see whose name is still written on the title." The silence that followed was not empty. It was thick, pressing, suffocating. I watched her face drain of color as her guests craned their necks to see. A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. Someone coughed. Someone else muttered. Melissa reached out, fingers trembling, as if to snatch the paper away. But she froze when the ballroom doors opened. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside. Their shoes tapped against the polished floor, sharp and unhurried. The music had stopped entirely now. All eyes shifted from Melissa's frozen smile to the steady presence of law. "Miss Melissa Caldwell," one officer announced, his tone calm but unyielding. "We need to speak with you about allegations of fraud and forgery." The sound of metal cuffs snapping shut was louder than the clapping had been moments earlier. The chain links rattled, echoing against the walls as Melissa's glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. Gasps filled the room. Ethan, her fiancé, stepped back, confusion spreading across his face. His parents exchanged horrified looks. The audience, a sea of sequined dresses and tuxedos, clutched their phones, some recording, others staring in disbelief. And me, I did not smile, I did not cry. I simply stood there, steady as the ocean I had lived beside for decades. I whispered words I had been keeping inside for far too long. I did not scream. I did not threaten. I stayed silent, and I let the truth speak for me. Melissa's eyes met mine, wide with a mixture of rage and fear. She shook her head, mouthing words she could not say out loud. The officers guided her toward the exit, and the weight of the ballroom shifted. I felt it in my bones. The moment when power reversed. For months, She believed she had outsmarted me, stripping me of the home her father and I had built with our own hands. She thought I was too old, too weak, too trusting to fight back. But she never understood the quiet strength of a mother who has been underestimated her entire life. The guests whispered, questions rising, judgments forming. Yet I remained calm, my fingers once again brushing the edges of that title deed. Not a weapon, not a sword, but the truth itself. As the officers disappeared through the doors with Melissa between them, I turned back to the stunned faces around me. My voice carried, though I spoke softly. This is not the story she told you. This is the story she tried to bury. I let the silence hang, because silence can be more powerful than words. But to understand why I chose to stay silent until that night, why I let the world believe her story until the moment the police walked in, I need to take you back. Back to the morning my heart gave out, and everything I thought I could trust collapsed with it. To explain why I carried that envelope into my daughter's celebration, I must return to the morning when everything changed. The day my own body betrayed me, and the daughter I had raised revealed who she had truly become. It was just after sunrise. I remember the faint light sliding through the kitchen blinds and the smell of coffee brewing. I had wrapped myself in the blue shawl I always kept by the chair, the same one my late husband gave me during a winter storm. I held his embroidered handkerchief in my pocket, a small square of cloth stitched with his initials. It had followed me through every chapter of my life since he passed, a soft reminder that I was never completely alone. I poured my coffee, lifted the cup to my lips, and then the pain struck. It was sudden, crushing, like an iron fist squeezing my chest. My knees buckled. The cup slipped from my hands and shattered on the tile floor. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, each second louder, heavier. I remember trying to breathe, but air refused to come. Then the world went dark. The next image is burned into me forever. The ceiling of the intensive care unit was white and endless. Machines surrounded me, their beeps pierced the silence. A monitor pulsed with every fragile beat of my heart. Tubes crossed over my chest, needles dug into my arms. My body felt heavy, pinned to the bed by invisible hands. I tried to move, but the pain returned in waves. Through the blur, I saw her, Melissa. My daughter sat at my bedside, mascara smudged, hair pulled back, face twisted into the mask of a concerned child. She clutched my hand tightly, as if she feared letting go. "Mom," she whispered, "thank God you are awake." The doctors weren't sure you would make it. Her words should have comforted me, but there was something in her eyes. Behind the shine of tears was a spark, small but sharp, like the glint of a knife. I knew that look. I had seen it in her as a teenager when she wanted something badly enough to bend the rules to get it. That spark unsettled me even more than the tubes in my chest. The cardiologist entered then. His name was Dr. Patel, a man with kind eyes and a voice that carried authority even when spoken softly. He checked my vitals, adjusted the wires, then leaned closer. "Mrs. Caldwell, you survived a massive heart attack. We performed emergency bypass surgery. You must understand. Your heart cannot handle stress of any kind right now. No arguments, no decisions, no paperwork. Complete rest is the only medicine." I nodded faintly, though every movement hurt. Melissa nodded as well, placing her hand on my arm. "Of course, doctor. I will make sure she has nothing to worry about." Her tone was obedient, caring, the kind any mother would want to hear. But then, as the doctor turned his back, I caught it, the flicker of her gaze. Quick, calculating, almost triumphant. It lasted no more than a second, but it was there. My heart monitor beeped faster. She squeezed my hand tighter, as if to cover the slip. I remember closing my eyes, pressing my husband's handkerchief to my palm. The fabric carried the faint scent of cedar from his old desk. Holding it gave me strength to steady myself, to anchor my mind against the fog of morphine. I repeated silently, "Stay awake, Nora. Stay awake." The days blurred after that. Nurses came and went, machines hummed. Melissa visited daily, her voice sweet, her smile gentle. She brushed my hair, adjusted my blanket, and assured me she was handling everything at home. She spoke of bills being paid, groceries stocked, neighbors reassured. It all sounded perfect, perhaps too perfect. Each time the doctor entered, he repeated the same warning. No stress, no signatures, no decisions. Your only job is to heal. He looked at Melissa directly, making sure she understood. She smiled back, nodding dutifully. "Absolutely, doctor." She won't lift a finger. But when he left, her eyes lingered on the clipboard by my bed, the stack of consent forms waiting for my attention. She ran her fingers across them like a pianist preparing to play. She thought I didn't notice, but a mother always notices. I tried to ask questions, but my throat was raw, my voice weak. She hushed me quickly, pressing the straw of water against my lips. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll take care of everything. Just sign when I ask, and you can go back to resting." Her words soothed, but her eyes betrayed her again. That spark had returned, brighter now. I told myself it was exhaustion, that my daughter loved me too much to betray me. Yet my hand reached instinctively for the handkerchief in my pocket. I squeezed it, remembering my husband's last words before cancer took him. "Guard what we built, Nora." Even from those we love, if you must, that morning, lying under the cold lights of the ICU, I did not know yet what Melissa had planned. But I felt it in my bones. The truth would come for me soon, disguised as kindness, cloaked in love, carrying the weight of betrayal. The days in the hospital blurred together like watercolor bleeding on wet paper. Morphine dulled the edges of everything, softening pain, but also stealing clarity. I drifted between shallow dreams and half-formed thoughts, trying to anchor myself with the sound of the heart monitor. Each beep was proof I was still alive. One afternoon, when the drugs pressed me deepest into fog, I felt a hand on my wrist. I opened my eyes halfway, and there was Melissa, leaning over me. Her hair framed her face in soft waves, her smile sweet, almost angelic. In her other hand, she held a clipboard stacked with papers. "Mom," she whispered gently, "I need you to sign something for the insurance." Nothing complicated, just routine. Without it, the hospital might not cover all your bills. Her words seeped into me slowly, the way light filters through heavy curtains. Insurance. Bills. Hospital. They were words I knew, but in that haze, they didn't connect fully. She positioned the pen between my fingers, guiding my hand as though I were a child learning to write again. I tried to focus on the lines of text, but they swam across the page. The letters blurred into shadows, twisting into shapes I could not hold steady. My body was heavy, my mind wrapped in cotton. I wanted to ask questions, but my lips formed no sound. Melissa smiled, stroking my arm. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll explain everything later. Just a signature here, then you can rest." Her tone was calm, her eyes wide with practiced concern. I looked at her, and, for a moment, I did not see the grown woman in front of me. I saw the little girl she had been, clutching my hand when I walked her across a busy street, her small voice saying, "Don't let go, Mommy." Back then, she trusted me to guide her. Now, half conscious and fragile, I trusted her in return. My hand trembled as I lowered the pen to the page. I scrawled something that resembled my name, though even as I did, I knew it was not my true signature. It was shaky, distorted, more a trace than a sign. Melissa's smile deepened, her eyes glinting for just a moment before she kissed my forehead. "Thank you, Mom." "You can sleep now." I sank back into the bed, the beeping of the monitor slowing with my breath. My fingers brushed against the handkerchief in my pocket, the one my husband had left me. The stitches under my touch steadied me, though not enough to fight the pull of exhaustion. My last thought before the darkness closed was a whisper inside me. I have trusted her, as I trusted her when she was small. Please let that trust be safe. When I awoke, the hospital walls were the same, but I felt weaker, emptier. Melissa was gone, leaving only a faint scent of her perfume. The clipboard had vanished too. I told myself it must have been real insurance paperwork, yet something gnawed at me, an unease that no medicine could ease. 2 weeks later, after the doctors released me, Melissa drove me home. She spoke cheerfully, distracting me with talk of her engagement and plans for the future. I looked out the window, too weary to question, too grateful just to breathe fresh air again. But as the car turned onto the familiar road, dread tightened inside me. My house stood at the end of the lane, perched proudly above the sea. Except something was wrong. The driveway gate, once welcoming, was shut with a heavy chain. And in front of the garden I had tended for 40 years stood a tall, white sign. Bold red letters shouted across the silence, "Sold." I pressed my hand against the window, shaking my head. "Melissa, what is this? Why is there a sign?" She cleared her throat, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Mom, I didn't want to upset you in the hospital. I had to make some decisions for your future. The house was too much for you to handle. I found a buyer who could close quickly. It's better this way." Her voice was smooth, rehearsed. She parked and stepped out, moving quickly to open my door, but I couldn't move. My body felt frozen. The chain on the gate seemed heavier than the stitches across my chest. I whispered, barely audible, "This was my home. Your father built this with his hands." Melissa sighed as if speaking to a stubborn child. "It's just a house, Mom. You'll see. I invested the money for both of us. You'll thank me later." Her words fell like stones. I gripped the cane beside me, my hand sliding once more to the pocket where my husband's handkerchief waited. My chest ached, but not from surgery. It was the ache of betrayal, sharp and undeniable. The car door closed. Melissa walked toward the chained gate, speaking quickly about new apartments, about comfort, about change. But her voice blurred like the papers had, blurred before. My eyes fixed on the red letters standing against the sky, screaming the truth she refused to say aloud. "Sold." The gate groaned as Melissa unlocked it, the heavy chain dragging against the iron bars before clattering to the side. I stepped out of the car slowly, the sea breeze brushing my face, carrying with it both salt and sorrow. My cane sank slightly into the gravel drive as I moved forward. I had braced myself for changes, but nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. My seaside home, once worth every bit of its $2.3 million valuation, stood stripped of the life it once held. The wide porch where I had rocked my daughter to sleep was bare, its paint peeling as if time had hurried itself in my absence. The windows were open but empty, no curtains swaying, no light within. The rose bushes I had tended, planted by my husband's hands, had been dug out, leaving raw patches of earth like wounds in the soil. I crossed the threshold into the yard, my heart thudding not just from surgery, but from grief. Where once stood my husband's wooden swing, There was only a patch of sand flattened by some careless machine. The garden path was gone, stones scattered, weeds already creeping through the cracks. I stopped, gripping my cane with both hands to steady myself. Every corner screamed absence, like a hollow echo of the years I had lived here. Inside the house, the devastation was worse. The foyer, once lined with photographs of birthdays, graduations, and quiet Christmas mornings, was stripped clean. Only faded outlines remained on the wall where frames had hung for decades. The hardwood floors, polished each spring, were scuffed by hurried footsteps and dragging boxes. I wandered from room to room, my voice too fragile to rise above a whisper. Where is everything? My words evaporated into the empty air. The living room was unrecognizable. The sofa where my husband and I had spent winter evenings reading together was gone. The mantelpiece, once crowded with seashells Melissa had collected as a child, stood naked. Even the rug that smelled faintly of cedar and sea was rolled away. I paused in the bedroom doorway, staring at the space where our bed had been. The quilt I had sewn by hand, each patch a story of our marriage, was missing. My jewelry box, my books, even the clock that had ticked away our nights, all of it had vanished. Only silence remained, heavy and sharp. Melissa trailed behind me, her heels clicking on the floor. "Mom, don't look so shocked," she said lightly, as if I were reacting to a change of paint color. "You don't need all this space anymore. You're recovering. You need simplicity." I turned to her, my throat dry, words catching. "This is my life, Melissa. Your father built this place for us. We grew here. We buried him here." She shrugged, her eyes cool, her voice crisp. "It's just a house. Memories aren't furniture. You'll carry them with you." She gestured, vaguely toward the sea view, where the sun was setting behind gray clouds. "Besides, I invested the money. You'll be taken care of. Trust me." Her words were precise, almost rehearsed, as if she had said them to herself many times before, but they cut deeper than any scalpel. "You don't need this. I invested for you." The confidence in her tone told me she believed she had done something clever, even noble. I pressed my hand into the pocket of my coat, fingers gripping the embroidered handkerchief. It anchored me against the rising storm in my chest. My heart fluttered weakly, but I forced my breath steady. I knew if I shouted, my body would give way. If I broke, I would truly lose everything. So I stood still. My silence filled the house where laughter had once lived. My daughter mistook it for surrender. She smiled, touched my shoulder as if comforting me. "You'll see, Mom. This is better. You'll thank me later inside," my soul screamed. But outside, I remained calm. The walls of my home echoed nothing now, so I let my quiet be the only answer. I thought of my husband, of his calloused hands smoothing those very walls, of his voice saying, "Guard this place, Nora. It holds us." My chest tightened, but I did not fall. The cane held me steady, and the handkerchief pressed into my palm reminded me that strength could live in silence. As Melissa walked away, speaking about new beginnings and investments, I stood in the hollow space of my life, my lips pressed together, my heart quivering but not shattered. She thought she had emptied me. She thought she had taken everything, but she had not, because even as I stood there surrounded by emptiness, I knew the truth. She had stripped the walls and sold the furniture, but she did not hold the title. She did not hold my will. And though my heart trembled, it had not broken. Not yet. In the days after I returned to find my house hollowed out, silence became my closest companion. Melissa was rarely around, always busy with her fiancé and the grand future she claimed she was building. The rooms echoed with emptiness, and I often found myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the bare walls where family photographs once hung. Each outline left on the paint was like a ghost, reminding me of what used to be. It was during one of those afternoons that I heard a soft knock on the back door. I shuffled slowly, leaning on my cane, and opened it to find Clara, my neighbor of 20 years. Clara was a widow, like me, her hair silver and tied neatly in a bun. She carried a pot covered with a towel, the steam rising gently beneath the cloth. "I made soup," she said simply, her voice carrying both warmth and restraint. She did not pry. She did not ask about the sign on the lawn or the moving trucks that had passed through while I was in the hospital. She just handed me the pot, her hands steady, her eyes kind. I thanked her quietly and placed the soup on the counter. The smell of chicken and herbs filled the kitchen, softening the sharp scent of dust that had settled since the furniture was taken. Clara didn't leave. She pulled out a chair and sat across from me, folding her hands in her lap. She didn't speak much at first, and I was grateful. Words felt heavy, and I had none to give. For a long while, we sat together in silence. It was not the suffocating silence that haunted me at night, but a gentler kind, the kind that reminds you another soul is present. She finally broke it, her voice low and reflective. "This house," she said, glancing around, "has always been like a lighthouse to me. When Henry was alive, we used to walk past on our evening strolls, and he would say, 'That's a home filled with life.' The roses, the laughter, the lights in the windows, it guided us, reminded us of what we wanted our marriage to be." Her words settled in me like a warm blanket. To her, my house was more than wood and walls. It was a beacon, a symbol. She saw it not as real estate, not as something to be liquidated and invested, but as a living memory. Tears stung the corners of my eyes, though I tried to blink them back. I whispered, "It doesn't feel like a lighthouse now. It feels like a shell." Clara reached across the table, her thin fingers resting gently on my hand. "Even lighthouses weather storms," she said. "Even when the paint chips and the windows break, the light remains inside. Sometimes it just takes someone to relight it." Her words pierced me deeper than she realized. Melissa had emptied the rooms, had chained the gates, had stripped the home of furniture and photographs. But she hadn't extinguished its light. That was still mine to guard, if I chose to. Clara didn't lecture, didn't offer solutions. She simply sipped the soup with me in silence. Every now and then she asked about my recovery, whether the doctors were pleased with my progress. She never once mentioned Melissa by name. I sensed she understood enough without needing details. I watched her, this woman who had also lost, who had faced her own storms. Clara had buried her husband, endured her own loneliness, and yet here she was, steady and kind, anchoring me when I felt adrift. She was a mirror of what I once had been, strong in quiet ways, resilient through simple acts. When she stood to leave, she placed her hand on my shoulder. "You're not as alone as you feel, Nora. I see you. Others see you too. Don't let her make you believe you've been erased." The words lingered after she left, more nourishing than the soup itself. I sat in the empty kitchen, the pot still warm on the counter, and realized something important. Melissa could take my furniture, she could claim my house was hers to sell, but she could not erase the witnesses. Clara had seen me, had seen the home for what it truly was. She was proof that my life had not vanished into silence. For the first time in weeks, I did not feel completely alone. The house might have been stripped bare, but someone had acknowledged its light, and by doing so, reminded me of my own. That night, I sat on the porch and watched the waves crash against the shore. The air was sharp, the sky painted with streaks of pink and gray. I clutched the handkerchief my husband had left me, the stitches worn smooth with time. In the stillness, I remembered Clara's words. Even lighthouses weather storms, and so did I. After Clara left, the house seemed quieter than ever, but the silence no longer felt entirely empty. Her presence had reminded me there was still light, even in ruins. That night, I couldn't sleep. The waves crashing beyond the porch sounded harsher than usual, like they were carrying warnings I needed to hear. I walked slowly through the bare rooms, cane tapping against the floor, until I reached the old oak cabinet in the study. The cabinet had survived every season of my life. Inside its drawers were scraps of paper, unpaid bills, and forgotten receipts. Melissa had cleared nearly everything else, but she hadn't bothered with this old piece of furniture. She never saw value in anything that didn't sparkle with money. I pulled open the bottom drawer, the one that stuck from years of humidity. I had to tug with both hands before it gave way. Inside, beneath yellowed envelopes and brittle check stubs, lay a folder wrapped in faded string. My breath caught. I recognized it instantly. My fingers trembled as I untied the string, the smell of old paper rising to meet me. Inside was the original title deed to the estate. My name, Nora Whitmore, was printed clearly, legally, unmistakably across the page. Not Melissa's, not anyone else's. Mine. I sank into the nearest chair, the paper shaking in my hands. I ran my fingertips over the ink as though it were braille, as though touching the letters could root me back to solid ground. My husband's voice rose in memory, strong and steady, as if he were sitting beside me again. Never take your eyes off this, Nora. This title is your shield. No matter what storms come, hold on to it. As long as it's in your name, the house is yours. I hadn't thought about those words in years. Back then, I had brushed them off, telling him we had Melissa to look after us when we grew old. I believed our daughter would honor what we built. But now, with the house gutted and sold without my knowledge, his warning echoed like prophecy. I lifted the paper closer to my face, slowing every movement, my breath coming heavy and deliberate. The lamplight fell across the deed, highlighting its embossed seal, the notary's stamp still crisp after decades. The world seemed to pause. My pulse thundered, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was clarity. I thought about how Melissa had slid papers beneath my hand while I lay dazed from medication, how her voice had sounded so casual. Just insurance forms, Mom. How I had trusted her, as I once trusted her tiny hand crossing a busy street when she was little. My eyes burned with the betrayal, but I didn't let tears fall. Instead, I steadied my breath, letting the weight of the deed anchor me. The paper felt fragile, yet it carried all the power Melissa thought she had stolen. This was no longer just a document. It was my lifeline, my defense, my proof that I was not as powerless as she believed. I placed the deed carefully on the table and pressed my palm flat against it. My fingers trembled, but the longer they rested there, the steadier I felt. Slowly, like the tide pulling back from shore, my grief gave way to resolve. My eyes hardened with a quiet fire I hadn't felt in years. This piece of paper was more than property rights. It was the embodiment of every sacrifice I had made, every late-night balancing accounts, every morning my husband rose early to keep the house standing. It was love, history, resilience, all bound into ink and fiber. Melissa had tried to strip me of those things, but she couldn't touch what she didn't know I still held. I folded the deed back into its folder, retying the faded string with careful precision. My hands still shook, but my spirit no longer did. I slipped it into my purse, close to my body, where I could feel its weight against me. For the first time since waking in that hospital bed, I felt a flicker of strength rising. I wasn't just a patient recovering from surgery. I wasn't just a mother who had been tricked. I was still the rightful owner of this home. And when the time came, when the world demanded proof, I would place this title before them, not with anger, not with shouting, but with the quiet certainty of a woman who had endured too much to be erased. I whispered into the stillness, as though to my husband's memory, "You were right. I kept my eyes on it, and it will protect me now." The waves outside kept pounding the shore, but for once, their rhythm matched my heartbeat, strong, steady, unbroken. Melissa invited me to a Saturday brunch at the waterfront cafe, the kind with pale tablecloths and glasses that made plain water look like crystal. She said her friends wanted to meet me. I suspected she wanted witnesses. I went anyway. I was tired of being the ghost in the story that carried my name. The deed rested in my purse against my ribs, steady as a second heartbeat. It bore my maiden name, Whitmore. Caldwell was the name I carried after marriage. Both belonged to me. Her friends arrived in curated waves, laughter bright, kindness practiced. Melissa stood to greet each one, polished in a cream blazer and gold earrings she never could afford on her own. "My mother entrusted everything to me," she said, tipping her glass toward me. "The house, the accounts, the plan. We are moving fast." A woman with red lipstick squeezed my shoulder. "Downsizing is freedom," she said. I smiled and let the weather of their talk pass over me. Ethan arrived a few minutes later. Photographs had not prepared me for the way he filled a room without trying. His parents ran a shipping company. His name opened doors. He kissed Melissa's temple, then offered me his hand. "I have heard how bravely you made the transition," he said. "Melissa tells me you gave her full control. It is inspiring, Mrs. Caldwell. Trust is the foundation of family. Trust is a beautiful thing," I answered, and left the rest unsaid. Melissa lifted her menu like a cue card. We cleared the clutter, repositioned assets, and protected Mom's health needs. Efficiency is love. The table hummed with approval. I cut my bread into squares so my hands would not shake. Ethan slid a tablet across the linen. "Here are the projections. After we refinance, cash flow from the estate will cover the venue and create a cushion for care. This is how responsible families operate. Capital should not sit idle." My home had become a spreadsheet. My years had been summarized into a cushion. I sipped water that tasted like pennies and watched a sailboat fight the current. "Where are you staying now, Mrs. Caldwell?" the red lipstick asked. "A condo by the hospital would be practical." "I am still by the sea," I said. It was not the answer they wanted. It was the only one I owed. Ethan covered my hand with his, smooth as a promise. "We want you close. We will be your safety net." He believed every syllable Melissa had poured into his ear. In his world, transfer meant ownership. Inheritance meant destiny. Love meant alignment with the plan. The conversation drifted to their engagement party. Contracts, flowers, lists. Melissa had begun to turn nouns into verbs. She orchestrated, she optimized. She never looked at me long enough to recognize the woman I had been before I became a station to dock her ambitions. Then came the small cruelty that bruised deeper than the larger theft. Melissa told a story about me mixing up medications after surgery. The table roared. Laughter comforts the storyteller who needs her narrative to be kind. I laughed too, softly. Dignity sometimes requires silence. Inside, a thread tugged loose. Is this my fault, I asked myself, for raising a child on certainty? Did I teach her that love means the door is always open, the bill always paid? Did I make comfort feel like a birthright rather than a gift? I saw her at the crosswalk again, tiny fingers locked around mine while trucks roared by. I had promised to never let go. Promises must change shape, or they strangle both people. Perhaps she mistook my quiet for consent. Coffee arrived. I stirred mine until the spoon touched porcelain. Melissa announced one more victory. "By next quarter, everything will be in my name," she said. The table nodded like a chorus. Ethan kissed her temple and told me I had raised a visionary. I set the spoon down and lifted my gaze. "Vision needs truth," I said. "Truth stands whether people clap or not." No one understood the sentence but me. That was fine. I paid for my coffee and rose carefully. The deed pressed into my side like a lighthouse I could carry. Outside, wind combed the water. On the walk home, the moral arithmetic ordered itself beside me. Love without limits becomes appetite. Generosity without boundaries becomes theft. I did not hate my daughter. I simply understood her mistake. She had confused access with ownership, applause with absolution. The sea was gray and honest. I breathed and felt steadier. I kept walking, and the line inside me would not bend any more today. I carried myself down to the shoreline that evening, cane in hand, the sand giving way beneath my steps. The tide was high, curling against the rocks with a steady rhythm, like a clock that refused to stop ticking. I lowered myself onto the old driftwood bench that had sat there for years, weathered by storms, but still standing. The ocean had always been my confessional, and that night, it was the only witness I could bear. I closed my eyes and let the salt air sting my cheeks. In the hush between waves, I could almost hear him, my husband, laughing, calling me Nora Bell, the way he used to when we were young. I saw us again, hand in hand, laying the first boards of the seaside house, painting the shutters a shade of blue that matched the horizon. We built it plank by plank, paycheck by paycheck. It wasn't just a house. It was the body of our marriage, the keeper of our dreams. Melissa had been a little girl then, chasing gulls, her hair tangled by the wind. She had no idea how many nights we went without to keep her fed, to keep the mortgage paid, to keep her safe. We swallowed our own wants so she could have hers. I remembered a scholarship she almost lost because the fees were too high. I sold my grandmother's pearls to cover it. She never knew. She didn't need to. That was what love meant to me, giving without asking for applause. The surf hissed against the sand, pulling me deeper into the current of memory. How many of my dreams had I folded neatly away so hers could bloom? I had wanted to travel, to see Italy where my ancestors once lived. I had wanted to open a small bookshop by the harbor. But each time I raised the thought, life required something else. Another tuition payment, another medical bill, another sacrifice. So I smiled, told myself I would wait, and tucked the dream inside a drawer. Now the drawer felt empty, its contents spent. My daughter looked at me not as the woman who had carried her across those years, but as a ledger to be balanced, a liability to manage, a burden. That word echoed louder than the sea. "I gave you everything," I whispered into the wind, "and now you strip away the last thing I hold." My voice didn't carry anger, only truth. I thought of the nights when she was sick as a child, when I pressed a cool cloth to her forehead and prayed fever would break. I thought of the afternoons. I worked double shifts so she could have ballet lessons. I thought of the meals I skipped so she could wear the dress she wanted for prom. I thought of the handkerchief my husband gave me before his last breath, telling me to stay strong for her. Every act had been love. And now, that love sat on a table in some cafe, recounted like capital to impress strangers. The waves crashed louder, as though the sea itself roared back my silence. I dug my cane into the sand and held the handkerchief close, The one with my husband's initials embroidered by his own mother. Its threads were frayed, but the stitching had endured. So had I. I am not angry, I told myself. Anger will not mend anything, but I am wounded. The words repeated with the rhythm of the tide, wounded but not destroyed, shaken but not erased. I let tears fall, hot and silent, blending with the spray of the sea. I didn't fight them. They were part of the truth. Yet behind them, a quiet strength stirred. Because the deed in my purse reminded me of what Melissa could not take. My voice, my memory, my resolve. The sun dipped low, painting the horizon in blood-orange hues. I remembered sitting here with my husband after Melissa's high school graduation. He had said, "We did it, Nora. She's ready for the world," I had believed him. Now, staring at the waves, I wondered if we had made her ready, or simply made her believe the world would always bend for her. I pressed the handkerchief to my lips, tasting salt and cloth. Did I do this? I asked the sea, asked him, asked myself. Did I teach her that love is entitlement? No answer came, only the crash of another wave. Yet, strangely, that was enough. The ocean had never given me answers, only perspective. And perspective was what I needed most. I sat until the sky turned dark, until the stars appeared like small reminders that light always breaks through. When I finally rose, my legs trembled, but my spine felt straighter. Melissa could see me as a burden, but I would not see myself that way. The ocean kept its rhythm, and I walked back to the house with silence as my shield, carrying both my grief and my resolve like twin weights. The morning after my walk by the sea, I put on my heaviest coat and slipped the deed into my purse. My hands still shook when I touched it, but this time from determination rather than fear. I called a cab instead of asking Melissa for a ride. Some conversations are too delicate to risk interception. The driver let me out in front of a brick building I had known for decades. Margaret Lewis's name gleamed on the brass plaque near the door. She wasn't just my lawyer. She had been a friend to my husband and me, the one who drew up our will, the one who explained the fine print when we nearly lost everything during a recession years ago. If anyone could give me clarity, it was Margaret. She rose from behind her oak desk as soon as I stepped into her office, gray hair swept into a practical knot, glasses perched at the end of her nose. "Nora," she said softly, her eyes scanning me like a physician's. "You've been through the fire. Sit down." Tell me everything. I handed her the folder with the deed, my fingers reluctant to let go until hers closed around it. Then I told her, piece by piece, the hospital bed, the papers Melissa slid under my pen while I floated in a haze of morphine, the sold sign that greeted me when I returned, the brunch where Melissa flaunted her supposed control. Margaret didn't interrupt. She simply listened, her lips pressed into a line that grew tighter with each detail. Finally, she opened her desk drawer and produced a thin file. "Melissa brought documents here," she said. "Claimed you had given her full power of attorney. She tried to use them to accelerate the transfer of the house." Margaret flipped the papers onto the desk between us. I smelled something wrong. The signatures were close, but not yours. And most importantly, there's no notarization, no proper legal seal. She forged them. I stared at the copies, my chest aching not from surgery, but from betrayal. To see my name written in someone else's hand felt like a theft of my very identity. Margaret leaned forward, her voice firm. "We could file charges today. Fraud, forgery, elder abuse, you'd have the law on your side. The case is solid. We'd win." I closed my eyes for a long moment, the sound of the ocean still in my ears. When I opened them, I saw the title deed lying beside the false papers, one true and one counterfeit. The difference between them was not just ink, it was integrity. "No," I said quietly. Margaret blinked. "No? Not yet." My voice grew steadier as I spoke. "If I strike now, she'll twist the story. She'll say I misunderstood, that I was still fragile from surgery. She'll make herself the victim." "I won't give her that stage." Margaret studied me for a long moment, then leaned back in her chair. "You've always had patience, Nora. But are you sure you can carry this weight longer?" I thought of Clara, bringing soup without questions, of the ocean, reminding me that storms pass, but tides return. I thought of Melissa, laughing at the cafe, mistaking silence for surrender. My silence was not surrender. It was preparation. "I can," I answered, "because power isn't in the papers or the signatures. Power is in the timing. She believes she's already won. Let her believe it a little longer. Then, when the right night comes, I won't need to shout. The truth will walk in on its own feet." Margaret tapped her pen against the forged documents, then slid them back into the file. "You're playing the long game," she murmured. "I'm surviving," I corrected gently. "And survival teaches patience. Melissa thinks she's clever, but she has never learned that silence can be sharper than a scream." Margaret's expression softened. "Your husband would be proud of you. You're holding steady when many would collapse." I reached for the handkerchief in my pocket, pressing the soft fabric to my palm. "He taught me to choose the right moment. He used to say, 'A lighthouse doesn't run after ships. It waits and shines and lets them reveal themselves.'" Margaret smiled faintly. "Then shine, Nora. And I'll be ready with the law when the tide turns." I left her office lighter than I had arrived. The deed pressed against me again, a quiet promise. I didn't have to rush. Melissa's own arrogance was building the case better than I ever could. And when the moment arrived, the reversal would be complete. Not through rage, but through truth revealed in silence. Melissa called me on a Thursday afternoon, her voice bright as though nothing had ever passed between us. "Mom, come to dinner tonight. Ethan and I want to celebrate. Just us." I heard the clinking of glasses in the background, laughter, the sound of a life she believed was hers to command. I agreed without hesitation. Sometimes you must step into the theater to watch the performance unfold. When I arrived, their home gleamed like a showroom. Silver candlesticks flickered on a long mahogany table. Crystal glasses stood like soldiers, polished to perfection. Plates were set in layers, forks and knives aligned as if they had been measured by a ruler. Yet beneath the shine, the air was cold. A home meant to impress, not to embrace. Melissa swept toward me in a silk blouse, her smile sharp as glass. "You look well, Mother," she said, kissing the air beside my cheek. "You'll be proud tonight." Ethan followed close, pulling out my chair. "Please, Mrs. Caldwell." "Sit. Melissa has prepared something special." The first course was laid before us, soup poured with theatrical care. Ethan raised his glass almost immediately. "To Melissa," he said, his voice full of admiration. "To her vision, her courage. Not everyone at her age can manage assets with such skill. She's brilliant." Melissa lowered her eyes, feigning modesty, but her smirk betrayed her pride. She glanced toward me, waiting for my agreement. I lifted my spoon, tasting the broth quietly, and gave no reply. Conversations circled around investments, upcoming contracts, their engagement party, the renovations planned for the new estate. They spoke as though I were a guest at someone else's table, not the woman who had built the life they were decorating. Each sentence painted Melissa as a heroine of finance, the savior of an aging mother. I tore a piece of bread, its crust hard, its center dry. I chewed slowly, deliberately. They wanted words from me, praise, validation, applause, but I gave them none. My silence became the loudest sound in the room. Ethan leaned forward, eager. Melissa told me she managed the transition seamlessly. No debt, no delays. Everything now belongs where it should. You must be relieved, Mrs. Caldwell. She lifted such a burden from you, I dabbed my lips with the napkin, then set it neatly beside my plate. Relief, I said softly, comes in many forms. That was all. My tone carried no accusation, no hint of anger, only truth, cloaked in quiet. Melissa shifted, her fork clinking against her plate. She filled the air with more talk, her new business contacts, her clever strategies, her bright future. Ethan nodded with every word, his pride for her as genuine as his ignorance of the truth. I ate little, a bite of roasted chicken, another sip of water, another fragment of bread. The tablecloth was smooth under my fingers, but I kept my hands folded in my lap, holding back the urge to tremble. They mistook my stillness for weakness. Melissa laughed louder. Ethan praised more lavishly. They thought they were rising, but each boast sank them deeper. My silence sharpened into a mirror, showing them who they truly were. I studied the candlesticks, their flames steady despite the draft. I thought of my husband's words, wait for the right moment. This was not yet that moment. Tonight was for listening. Tonight was for letting them reveal themselves. As the plates cleared, Melissa raised her glass. To family, she said, her smile trained on me. To a mother wise enough to trust her daughter with everything. I lifted my glass of water, touched it gently to my lips, and set it down. I did not echo the toast. I let the silence answer in my place. It hung heavier than any words I could have spoken. Ethan cleared his throat, glancing between us. Melissa laughed again, though the sound wavered, thin at the edges. I met her eyes at last, steady and unblinking. She looked away first. The dinner ended with polite farewells. Ethan pressed my coat over my shoulders, his kindness genuine, his understanding absent. Melissa kissed the air again, her hand resting briefly on my arm. "Thank you for coming, Mom," she said, her tone laced with triumph. I nodded once, stepping out into the night air. The cold struck my cheeks, bracing, honest. Behind me, the house glowed with artificial light. Ahead, the sea waited with its eternal rhythm. I walked slowly down the path, the crunch of gravel under my shoes. My silence had spoken for me tonight, sharper than accusation, heavier than protest. They thought I had yielded, but I knew better. Sometimes the quietest voice carries the greatest weight. That night, after the dinner at Melissa's, I returned to my quiet house and slipped off my shoes by the door. The silence was so complete it pressed against my chest. I set my cane beside the chair and lowered myself slowly, my body still tender from the surgery. The taste of dry bread lingered in my mouth, and for a moment, I wanted to let bitterness take root. But instead, I reached for the handkerchief, pressing it into my palm, and closed my eyes. Memory has its own tide. It pulls you back when you least expect it. One moment I was sitting alone, and the next I was back on the beach 25 years ago. The air was bright with the sound of gulls, and the sand was hot beneath our feet. Melissa was no older than 6, her hair spun gold by the sun, her laughter carrying across the waves like a hymn. "Look, Mommy," she called, running ahead with a stick she used to draw pictures in the wet sand. She carved out a crooked square, then added lines for windows and a door. "This is our house. But when I grow up, I'll build you a bigger one, with shiny windows and a kitchen that smells like cookies all the time." I had laughed, brushing the sand from her knees when she tumbled. I already have the best house because you're in it. Her little arms wrapped around my neck, tight and earnest. But I'll make you proud, Mommy. I'll make sure you never worry. That promise still echoed in me, more vibrant than any toast at her dinner table. When did that bright-eyed child vanish? When did her laughter sharpen into calculation? When did love bend into entitlement? The room around me blurred as I let the memory sink deeper. I saw her on her first day of school, clutching her lunchbox decorated with daisies. She turned back at the classroom door, waved, and shouted, "Don't leave, Mommy. Stay until I'm brave." I had stayed, of course, watching through the little square window until she found her seat. Another tide pulled me further. Melissa, 12, running down the beach in a white dress that fluttered around her knees. She had begged for that dress, and I had worked an extra weekend shift at the diner to buy it. She spun in circles, arms wide, hair catching the sunlight. "Someday I'll buy you dresses, Mommy. Dresses that shine." The images came faster now, layered like waves crashing upon each other. Her college acceptance letter spread across the kitchen table, her eyes wide with hope. I had cried that night, not from fear of bills, but from joy at her opportunity. "You'll go further than I ever did," I had told her. She hugged me so tightly I could feel her heart beating against mine. Now, years later, she sat in silk blouses at polished tables, telling the world she owned what I had built. She used words like assets and transitions, as though love were a ledger and sacrifice a liability. "Melissa," I whispered into the empty room, "when did the tide turn? When did my little girl who drew houses in the sand become a woman who sold the one we built?" I pressed the handkerchief to my lips. My husband had embroidered my initials there once, his stitches uneven but steady. He had always believed Melissa's light would guide her. I had believed it too. Now I wondered if we had mistaken ambition for light. I didn't feel anger, only sorrow heavy enough to bend my shoulders. Yet beneath the sorrow was a deeper question, one that refused to leave me alone. Was this my fault? Did I love her so completely, give so freely, that she learned to take without thought? Did I teach her generosity without teaching her gratitude? The waves outside pounded, reminding me of that promise she once shouted across the sand. "I'll make sure you never worry." Now I worried every day. I sat with the memories until the clock struck midnight, the room dim except for the lamp's soft glow. My tears dried on my cheeks, leaving salt like the ocean's spray. The child she once was still lived inside her, buried somewhere beneath ambition and pride. I wanted to believe that. I had to believe that. But belief alone would not protect me. That was why the deed lay folded in my purse, why Margaret's warning still echoed in my mind. I would not let sorrow blind me again. I could grieve for the little girl while guarding myself from the woman she had become. I rose slowly, pressing my hand to the wall for balance, and whispered to the night, "I see you, my child. I remember you, but I will not be erased." The ocean answered in its endless rhythm, steady as truth. The knock at the door came just after sunrise. I was still in my robe, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea, when Clara appeared on the porch with the morning paper tucked under her arm. Her face carried a tension I hadn't seen before, as though she had wrestled with whether to bring it at all. "I thought you should see this," she said, placing the folded pages on my kitchen table. Her voice was gentle, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. I lowered myself into the chair, my cane leaning against the counter. The newspaper's ink smudged my fingertips as I spread it open. There she was, Melissa, my daughter, smiling on the front of the business section. Her blonde hair caught the light, her teeth bright, her expression poised with the confidence of someone who believed the world was hers. The headline read, "Young visionary Melissa Caldwell takes the helm, managing mother's $1 million estate with flair." My stomach clenched. The article praised her as a rising entrepreneur, a woman unafraid to take bold steps. Phrases leapt off the page: stepping into her mother's shoes, streamlining family wealth, building a legacy. Every word painted her as a savior, as though I had willingly handed her the reins and bowed out of my own life. There was even a quote attributed to her: "My mother trusts me completely. She knows I'll make the family's future brighter." I stared at the photograph again, the curve of her smile so familiar and yet so foreign. It was the same smile she had worn when she brought me seashells as a child, when she twirled in her white dress on the beach. But now it had hardened, sharpened into something else. A mask built for cameras and strangers. Clara sat across from me, silent, her eyes watchful. She didn't rush me. She let the moment sink in, as though she knew the wound needed to bleed before it could. Close, I traced the outline of Melissa's face on the paper with a trembling finger. Half of me ached with pride. My daughter had presence. She had ambition. She could command attention. The other half of me ached with grief. She had done it by erasing me, by turning me into a shadow who existed only to validate her story. Inside my chest, something shifted. I whispered to myself. I stayed silent. But silence is not consent. The words came out clear, not as protest, but as truth. A truth that settled into my bones, stronger than anger, stronger than despair. Clara reached for my hand, her touch steady. "The world may believe her for now," she said softly. "But the truth has its own clock. It always does." I nodded, folding the paper carefully, though every fold felt like a cut. Melissa's face disappeared between the creases, but her voice from the article lingered in my ears. "My mother trusts me completely." I had trusted her once. Trusted her with scraped knees, with secrets, with my savings, with my very heartbeat on an operating table. And she had turned that trust into a stage for herself. Yet looking at her picture, I could not hate her. Love does not vanish with betrayal. It only changes its shape. Mine had changed into something quieter, sterner, less forgiving, but still there. I set the paper aside and tightened my grip on the handkerchief in my pocket. My husband's stitches pressed into my skin, reminding me of promises made, of strength that outlasted storms. Melissa could tell the world she was the master of this estate, but the deed in my purse told a different story. For now, I would let her play her part. I would let her bask in the spotlight she had stolen. But when the curtain fell, it would not be applause waiting for her. It would be truth. "I will wait," I told Clara. Not because I am weak, but because the right moment matters. She thinks she has silenced me. She doesn't understand that silence can be preparation. Clara's eyes glistened, though she blinked the tears away. "You are stronger than she knows, Nora." Stronger than you realize, I looked once more at the folded paper, then slid it into the drawer beside me. My daughter's photograph stared up briefly before I closed it away. Out of sight, but not out of mind. "I am silent," I whispered to myself. But silence is not agreement. The ocean roared faintly in the distance, as though it had heard me and approved. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday morning, slid neatly through the mail slot as though it were any other letter. I picked it up from the floor, noting the weight of the cardstock, the shimmer of embossed lettering. Melissa's style was all over it. Lavish, polished, desperate to impress. My name was written in sweeping calligraphy, Mrs. Nora Caldwell. though the flourish felt less like affection and more like a signature on a transaction. I carried it to the kitchen table and sat down, the sunlight falling across the envelope. My fingers hesitated before breaking the seal. For a moment, I let myself imagine what it might contain if things had been different. A warm note from my daughter, an invitation offered with humility, gratitude, or love. But reality had no such softness. Inside was a card as thick as cardboard, printed in gold ink. Melissa Caldwell and Ethan Harrington invite you to their engagement celebration, a night of triumph, elegance, and future promises. Beneath the formality, a handwritten line caught my eye. Melissa's handwriting, slanted, confident, almost taunting. "Come, mother. Witness what I have built. Witness my success. Stand with pride as I show the world what I've achieved from what you entrusted me." I let the card rest on the table, my hand pressing flat against it. The words weren't a request. They were a declaration, not "please join us," but "be there to validate me." She didn't want me as a guest. She wanted me as a prop, a silent testament to the story she had spun for others. I reached for my tea, now gone cold, and sipped anyway. The bitterness matched the taste rising in my chest. I thought back to the article Clara had brought, the photograph, the praise, the fiction Melissa had woven about managing her mother's estate. Now this invitation was her next act, a stage built higher, brighter, louder. She believed I would stand in the wings, nodding on cue. A small smile curved my lips. She didn't realize I had a script of my own. I folded the invitation neatly, creasing it once, then again, until it was small enough to fit into the drawer of my old oak cabinet. I opened the drawer slowly, the wood groaning, and slid the card beside the folder that held the original deed. Gold ink beside faded paper. A daughter's boast beside a husband's warning. A lie beside the truth. I rested my hand there for a long moment, fingers brushing the two objects together. My chest rose and fell with a steady rhythm. The cane leaned against the chair. The handkerchief lay in my lap. All my anchors were close at hand. The words echoed in my mind. Melissa's note, "Witness my success." And my own reply, unspoken but certain, "I will, but not in the way you expect." I could almost hear my husband's voice again, calm and steady. "Wait for the right moment, Nora. Timing is everything." This was the moment he had prepared me for without either of us knowing it. I closed the drawer carefully, sealing away both invitation and deed. Not hidden, not forgotten. Preserved, waiting. The house was quiet, but the silence no longer pressed down on me. It breathed with me, like a companion, like a witness. Melissa thought silence meant surrender. She didn't yet understand it could be a blade, sharper than any accusation. I stood slowly, straightened my spine, and looked out toward the sea. The horizon stretched wide and patient, as if it too knew that storms gather before they break. When the night of her celebration came, I would be there, not as the silent prop she imagined, but as the keeper of truth she had underestimated. I whispered into the stillness, "Yes, Melissa, I will witness. But I will not play the part you've written for me." The waves outside crashed in answer, steady, relentless, eternal. The morning of Melissa's engagement celebration arrived with a sky stretched wide and blue, the kind of day that seemed too gentle for the storm I carried inside. I rose early, my heart steady but heavy, and opened the wardrobe that had held my life in quiet folds of fabric. Sequins and silk had never been mine. I reached instead for a dress the color of soft slate, simple cotton with long sleeves. It was plain, almost modest, yet it felt like armor. On the dresser lay a chain I hadn't worn in years. Dangling from it was my husband's wedding band, his initials still etched faintly inside. After his passing, I had slipped it on the chain so it would rest against my heart. That morning, I lifted it carefully, clasping it around my neck. The cool weight pressed against my skin, reminding me that even in absence, some promises still held. I studied my reflection. Lines creased the corners of my eyes, silver threaded through my hair. Time had carved its truth into me, and I would not hide it. My beauty was not in polished surfaces. It was in the resilience that refused to break. I whispered to the woman staring back, "You are enough." You always were. By mid-morning, I placed the deed into my purse. Its paper crackled as though it recognized the gravity of the day. The ring pressed against my chest, the deed against my side. Two anchors, love and truth, traveling with me. I closed the clasp firmly, my hand steady now. A knock at the door broke the silence. Clara stood there with a small bouquet of rosemary tied in twine. "For strength," she said simply, pressing it into my hand. Her eyes searched mine. "You're walking into a room designed to dazzle and intimidate. But don't forget, Nora, you are not going alone." Emotion welled in my throat. Clara was more than a neighbor. She had become a quiet witness to my journey, a mirror reflecting back the dignity I sometimes doubted. I touched her hand. "Thank you," I whispered, "for standing with me, even if no one else does." She smiled, her own wrinkles deepening like rivers etched by time. "That's what lighthouses are for," she said. "They shine when others are lost." At noon, Margaret arrived, her briefcase snapping shut with precision. She wore her usual navy suit, hair pinned neatly, expression unyielding. She set the file on my table. "Everything is in order," she told me. "If tonight becomes the moment, you have the law on your side. Every paper signed, every stamp in place." She paused, looking at me as though to weigh my resolve. "But the choice is yours. You hold the timing?" I nodded. No. Tonight is not about revenge, Margaret. It's about truth." She placed a hand on my shoulder. "Then let the truth be louder than their applause." As the hour drew near, I sat once more by the window overlooking the sea. The waves moved steadily, neither hurried nor hesitant. They reminded me of my own pace. Slow, deliberate, unshakable. I thought of Melissa as a child, promising to build me a grander home, and of Melissa, the woman, selling the one we had. Both lived in her. Both lived in me. When the car arrived to take me, I slipped on my shawl, the rosemary tucked into my purse beside the deed. The chain with the ring gleamed faintly in the light, a circle unbroken even by loss. As I stepped out onto the path, Clara called after me, her voice steady and warm. "Remember, Nora, this is your story, not hers. Don't let them write you out." I turned back, giving her the smallest smile, one carved from gratitude and courage. "I won't," I said, and then I walked toward the waiting car, the sound of the sea fading behind me, the weight of memory and justice pressed close against my heart. Tonight, Melissa would have her stage, but I carried the script she hadn't read. The car pulled up to the Harrington estate just as dusk fell. From the outside, the mansion glowed like a beacon, every window lit, the driveway lined with lanterns that cast long shadows across the stone. Music drifted through the night air, the polished notes of a string quartet weaving between the murmurs of arriving guests. I stepped out slowly, my cane steady on the gravel, and lifted my chin. Inside, the ballroom was a world far removed from the quiet corners of my home. Crystal chandeliers spilled light like waterfalls across marble floors. Waiters in black jackets glided past with trays of champagne. The air shimmered with perfume and polite laughter, the sort of cultivated gaiety that comes from people who know their names will be mentioned in tomorrow's society column. I found my seat near the edge of the room, deliberately away from the center. My slate-colored dress blended into the shadows, and I preferred it that way. From here, I could observe everything: the flick of Melissa's hair as she moved from guest to guest, the way Ethan's parents greeted their circle with pride, the rhythm of the evening unfolding. Melissa shone at the center of it all. Her gown was emerald green, chosen to make her the brightest jewel in the room. She laughed easily, her voice carrying above the music. Guests leaned in close when she spoke, as though her words themselves were currency. She thrived in this light. She wanted the world to believe it was hers. When the first toast came, Ethan raised his glass, his smile unwavering. "To Melissa," he announced, "a woman of vision, of courage, of brilliance. She has taken on the responsibility of family legacy with grace, ensuring her mother enjoys her years without worry." Applause erupted, polite, but enthusiastic. Melissa lifted her own glass, turning so every eye would catch her. "I am proud to stand here tonight, not only as Ethan's fiancée, but as someone who has stepped up for family. My mother," she gestured toward me with a sweeping hand, "entrusted everything to me. She allowed me to manage her estate, her affairs, her future. Because of her faith, I can make sure she lives peacefully, free of burdens." The crowd cheered, some even clapping louder at the mention of sacrifice. Ethan's parents nodded approvingly, his mother dabbing her eyes as if moved by the noble story. I sat still, hands folded around the glass of water before me. The condensation slid down my fingers, cold and grounding. Every word Melissa spoke was a performance. She painted herself as the dutiful daughter, the savior who had lifted me from responsibility. She spoke as if the home I had built was her triumph, as if my years of sacrifice were simply prelude to her success. I took a sip of water, letting it rest cool in my mouth before swallowing. Silence was my choice tonight. Let them hear her version of the story. Let them believe, for now, that she had secured her victory. The chandelier light sparkled above her head, but I knew it would not last. Melissa continued, her confidence swelling with each cheer. "We are not just celebrating love tonight," she declared. "We are celebrating the future. Ethan and I will build a foundation on what my mother gave me, and together we will expand it. This is what family legacy means: growth, courage, and trust. The word struck me harder than any other. She wore it like a crown, a shield. Yet I knew trust had been the first thing she betrayed. I pressed my palm lightly against the chain around my neck, feeling the ring resting against my skin. My husband's promise. My anchor. From across the room, Clara caught my eye. She was there, quietly in the crowd, though she had not announced it. Her presence steadied me, and I thought of Margaret, waiting with the documents, ready when I was. Their support was invisible to the crowd, but it was real, more real than the applause filling the ballroom. I let Melissa's voice fade into background noise, focusing instead on the rhythm of my breath, the slow beat of my heart. My silence was not weakness, it was preparation. Another sip of water, another round of applause. My daughter, radiant in emerald, basked in triumph that was not hers to keep. And I, plain in slate, ring against my chest, deed in my purse, sat quietly at the edge of her spotlight, waiting for the moment when silence would no longer be mistaken for surrender. The clinking of glasses silenced the room. Melissa, glowing in her emerald gown, held her champagne aloft and flashed the crowd that smile she had perfected for cameras. Then, with a gesture as smooth as theater, she turned toward me. "And now," she announced, "the woman who made this all possible. My mother. Would you say a few words, Mom? Just to Confirm to everyone how proud you are." It was not an invitation. It was a command dressed in silk. The guests turned in unison, their eyes landing on me like a weight. The chandeliers above flickered, scattering light across the polished floor. I set down my glass of water, pressing my damp fingertips into the linen napkin, and rose. Each step toward the stage was deliberate. The cane tapped softly, the sound echoing louder than the orchestra behind me. My slate dress brushed my ankles, the wedding band at my chest cool against my skin. The envelope in my purse shifted with each step, its paper whispering like a secret preparing to speak. I reached the small platform where Melissa stood, radiant and certain of her victory. She placed a manicured hand lightly on my shoulder, her grip meant to guide me toward the microphone. Her smile never faltered, but her eyes carried a glint of warning. Play your part. I took my time, adjusting the microphone lower, steadying my breath. The room quieted further, expectant. My gaze moved across the faces, Ethan's parents, proud and beaming. Clara, hidden at the edge of the crowd, her eyes steady on me. Margaret, I knew, waited somewhere beyond these walls, ready. Melissa leaned in, whispering just for me. "Say something kind, Mom. Just a sentence." That's all. I looked at her, my daughter, and for a flicker I saw the child she had been. Sunlight in her hair, building sandcastles with dreams of giving me the world. Then the image hardened into the woman before me, her ambition painted in emerald silk. Slowly, I reached into my purse. My fingers brushed against the deed, the paper worn but strong. I pulled the envelope free and held it in my hand, not yet opening it. The room seemed to inhale with me, waiting. My voice, when it came, was calm, low, and steady. "My daughter believes I am weak. She thinks because I stayed silent, I surrendered. But she has misunderstood. Real strength," I paused, letting the words fall heavy into the stillness, "is truth." Melissa's smile stiffened, her grip on my shoulder tightening. A ripple moved through the guests, confusion, curiosity. I opened the envelope and slid out the deed, holding it up so the light caught the official seal, the inked signatures. "This," I said, my voice gaining quiet force, "is the title to the house my husband and I built. It still bears my name. It always has. What you may have heard, what has been claimed, is not the truth." The silence in the room deepened, sharper than any applause. Ethan's brow furrowed. His parents exchanged startled glances. Melissa's hand dropped from my shoulder. Inside, my heart beat hard, but my face remained composed. I had practiced silence long enough to know its power. "I was asked to bless this evening with words of pride. And I will. I am proud of the truth. Proud that no amount of performance can erase it. Proud that integrity still stands, even when ambition tries to rewrite it." I folded the deed carefully, sliding it back into its envelope. My hands no longer trembled. "You see, I do not need to shout. I do not need to fight. All I need is to let the truth stand on its own feet." Tonight, it has Melissa opened her mouth, but no words came. The audience shifted, the weight of doubt creeping across their faces. The applause she had expected never arrived. Instead, there was only silence. My silence, now shared by an entire room. I stepped back from the microphone, my cane clicking softly against the polished floor. My daughter thought she had summoned me to play a role in her triumph. Instead, she had given me the stage for the truth. And in that moment, the balance shifted. I held the deed high so the chandelier light struck the seal. The paper shone like a small moon. The room leaned toward me. I let the quiet gather, then asked the only question that mattered. "Whose name is still here?" I angled the page so the line was plain. Whose name is still on the title? Whispers rose. People edged closer. A man raised his glasses to read. Ethan's mother touched her necklace. His father stared. Ethan looked from the paper to Melissa, searching her face for an answer he wanted to believe. "Is it true?" he asked, voice low. Melissa caught his hand. "It is a misunderstanding. My mother is confused. She has been unwell." I did not argue. "The title never left my name," I said. "Not by consent, not by law." The quartet stopped. A glass struck marble and cracked. The room tipped from certainty into doubt. Ethan hesitated, half withdrawing his hand. Stories do not hold when paper refuses to bend. The ballroom doors opened. 2 officers entered with unhurried steps, the weight of official patience in their faces. "Mrs. Caldwell, Ms. Caldwell," one said, "we received documentation of possible fraud involving a property sale. We need to ask a few questions." The ring at my throat steadied me. "I will cooperate," I said. "This is the original title." I brought it because tonight was built on claims. Melissa laughed thinly. "This is absurd. The hospital has paperwork. My mother signed." "Then you can show it," the officer replied. Ethan turned to her. "You told me it was finalized. You told me your mother wanted this." "Ethan, not now," she whispered, tightening her grip. Gently, he unhooked her fingers and let them fall. The gesture was small. The meaning was not. He stepped back 1 pace and did not return. The officers faced Melissa. "Ma'am, will you come with us to answer questions? You are not under arrest at this time." A breath moved through the guests. Melissa lifted her chin. "I will not be humiliated at my own celebration." "This is not humiliation," I said, keeping my voice soft. "It is clarity." I shifted aside so the officers could pass. Near the stage, Clara stood like a pillar. Somewhere beyond these lights, Margaret waited with filings arranged and stamps set. Ethan's mother approached me. "Did you ever surrender the title?" she asked. "No," I said. She nodded once and guided her husband back, making room for truth. Melissa tried again for Ethan's hand. He did not offer it. His gaze followed the officers. The center of gravity had moved. They gestured to the side door. Melissa gathered the sparkle of her gown and walked. The quartet chose silence. At the threshold she turned, searching for a face that would rescue her from consequence. None arrived. The door closed behind them. Soft voices returned. Some defended her with ifs and maybes. Others measured the distance between generosity and theft. I returned the deed to its envelope and sat. My water was warm. I drank anyway. The ring cooled my skin. Ethan approached, but kept a distance. "Mrs. Caldwell, I did not know." "I believe you," I answered. "Belief is not proof." "What will happen now?" "Whatever the truth requires." He stepped away, not to Melissa, not to me, but to the space between what was promised and what was real. I looked at the room built to crown a story. Yet the strongest thing present was a line of ink on an old page, and a question asked at the right time. I felt no thrill. Reckonings do not taste like victory. They taste like salt and clean air. I thought of the porch at dawn, of my husband sanding the rail, of the years that taught us to work and wait. I had waited, and the waiting had held. I set the envelope in my purse and closed the clasp. Beyond the windows, the ocean lay black and patient. The officers would speak with Melissa. Margaret would file what remained. The law would do what the law is meant to do. What mattered was that a hand had been released, and a lie had lost its footing. Power had not shifted because I shouted. It had shifted because paper and time met in public. I finished my water. The night, once scripted, was unwriting itself. I felt the bruise of sorrow, and the steadiness that follows pain when it finally has a name. Music did not return. Conversation did, careful and slow. I rested my palm over the purse where the deed lay. I stood straighter. The crowd had seen what it needed to see. The balance had changed. The room knew it. So did I. The ballroom air had shifted, heavy as a storm about to break. The officers stood by the door with Melissa, their patience steady but immovable. Melissa's voice cracked through the silence like glass under strain. "Mother, please," she cried, her eyes darting toward me. "Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you wanted this for me." Her hands trembled as she reached forward, but no one stepped closer. The emerald gown she had chosen to dazzle with now clung to her like a costume that no longer fit. I remained where I was, seated, my palms resting lightly on the tablecloth. My glass of water was empty. I traced the rim with one finger, grounding myself. I did not rise, I did not argue, I did not soothe. My silence filled the space more completely than her pleading words. She tried again, voice higher, frantic. "You said you trusted me. You said everything would be mine someday. Isn't that what you always told me? Mother, answer me." The guests shifted uneasily, their gazes flicking between us. Phones appeared in hands, their screens glowing as they began to record. The story Melissa had written for herself was unraveling, thread by thread, in front of everyone she had hoped to impress. The doors opened once more, and Clara entered quietly, steady as the tide. Beside her walked Margaret, file in hand, her stride brisk and sure. Clara's eyes found mine immediately, and she gave the smallest nod, as though to say, "You are not alone." Melissa saw them too and faltered. "Who are they?" she demanded, though her voice shook. Margaret lifted the file. "I am the family's attorney. These are the verified documents that prove ownership never left Mrs. Caldwell's hands." She spoke with calm authority, her words slicing through the noise. The crowd murmured, the whispers swelling into waves. Someone near the back said, "Record this." Another, "She lied." Cameras tilted forward, red dots blinking. The moment had become larger than the room. Melissa sank to her knees on the marble, mascara streaking her cheeks. "Please, Mom," she sobbed. "Don't do this to me. Don't let them see me this way." I placed both hands flat on the table, leaning forward just slightly. My voice, when it came, was low but clear enough to carry. "I am not doing this to you, Melissa. You did this to yourself." She wept harder, the sound echoing against the high ceiling. The officers waited, unhurried, as though they knew that collapse was part of the process. Ethan stood frozen near his parents, his jaw clenched, his eyes locked on the floor. He did not move toward her. I sat back again, folding my hands in my lap. Inside, my heart ached. No mother wants to see her child crumpled on a cold floor, but I had learned that sometimes love must stand still. The thematic echo rose within me, as steady as the sea outside. I whispered, not for the cameras but for myself. I did not shout. I only let the truth speak. Clara caught the words. She pressed a hand to her chest, her eyes shimmering. Margaret closed the file with a decisive snap, sealing the moment. Around us, the hum of voices grew louder, a chorus of disbelief and judgment. Some shook their heads, others captured video from every angle. This was no longer Melissa's triumph. It was her unmasking. A viral moment born not of spectacle, but of truth exposed. Melissa crawled forward on her knees, her hands clasped in front of her like a child begging for mercy. "Please, Mother. Don't let them take everything from me. Don't let them take my name." Tears burned my own eyes, but I did not answer. Sometimes silence is the only language left when words have been twisted too many times. I sat as the chandelier light glared down, the room alive with murmurs and recording devices, my daughter's sobs rising and falling like a tide breaking against rocks. And still, I did not move, because the truth was already speaking louder than any defense she could muster, and the truth would outlive the noise. The morning after the party, the world seemed quieter, as though even the gulls knew to circle at a distance. I rode in silence back to the coast, the deed resting safely in my purse, its weight no heavier than before, yet carrying an entirely different meaning. When the cab pulled into the familiar drive, I stepped out slowly, my cane tapping against gravel, and stared at the house I had not entered in weeks. The sold sign was gone now, removed as swiftly as a lie once it has been unmasked. I reached into my pocket and drew out the old brass key, its ridges worn smooth from decades of use. My fingers trembled as I slid it into the lock. For a moment I feared it wouldn't turn, that too much had changed, that the door might resist me. But the lock yielded with a soft click, as if welcoming me home. The door creaked open, and the smell of salt and wood greeted me. The rooms were bare, furniture gone, curtains stripped, frames emptied. But the house still breathed. The sea air clung to the walls, and when I touched the wooden dining table, I felt the faint grooves my husband's hands had left when sanding it years ago. My palm lingered there, pressing against memory. I walked slowly from room to room, cane tapping against the floorboards, echoing against emptiness. In the bedroom, the indent where our bed once stood was still visible, sunlight falling through the window in the same pattern as always. In the kitchen, the faint scent of coffee seemed to rise from the walls themselves. Even stripped bare, the house carried our life like a secret it refused to surrender. I sat down on the step of the porch, the sea stretching wide in front of me. The tide rolled in, white foam licking the sand, retreating only to return again. It struck me how much the rhythm of the ocean mirrored the rhythm of my own heart, slowed by surgery, steadied by patience, refusing to stop. I thought of Melissa, of her emerald gown, her voice breaking in the ballroom, her tears staining marble floors. I thought of the girl she had been, drawing crooked houses in the sand, promising me a home bigger than the sky. Both images lived in me. Both were my daughter. And yet, as I sat with the ocean before me and the ring pressing against my chest, I felt no triumph, no gloating, no vengeance, only a steady quiet. The truth had spoken. The law would move forward in its time. My part was to let silence remain my answer. The moral conflict pressed at me like the wind off the waves. Could I have raised her differently? Could I have taught her gratitude instead of entitlement? Could I have loved her with firmer edges? Perhaps. But regret is a tide you cannot fight forever. It will pull you under if you let it. I breathed deeply and let it wash past. I brewed tea, simple and strong, pouring it into the chipped mug that had survived every packing box and every purge. Sitting on the porch, I lifted it to my lips. The steam rose, mixing with the salty air, carrying a comfort words could not. From here, the horizon was clear, endless. My husband and I had sat on these same steps countless times, planning futures, nursing dreams. Now I sat alone, but not hollow. The house was mine still, but more than that, the quiet was mine. I do not hate you, Melissa, I whispered to the waves, but I will not be erased by you either. The gulls cried overhead, the water surged and withdrew, and the world did not ask me to speak louder than that. Soft closure came not as applause, not as punishment, but as peace. I did not need her to fall for me to rise. I only needed to sit here, tea warming my hands, silence wrapping around me, and know that truth had not abandoned me. I watched the tide roll in and out until the tea grew cold. And for the first time in a long time, I felt steady, as though I had stepped fully back into my own life. I didn't shout. I didn't fight. I only let the truth speak, and now it carried me forward. 2 days after the party, an envelope appeared beneath my door, tucked with circulars. I recognized the careful handwriting before I bent to pick it up. Clara always wrote as though each letter were a promise kept. I carried it to the table, set the kettle on, and waited for the quiet to settle around me like a shawl. Her note was short, written in blue ink that bled a little at the pauses. "Nora," it read, "you did what not everyone dares to do. You chose truth over the comfort of endless silence. I was there. I saw your strength land without noise. A lighthouse does not argue with the storm. It shines. A sprig of dried rosemary fell from the fold, still fragrant, still green at its heart." I pressed it to my palm and felt steadier. I placed the letter beside my mug, then opened the drawer that holds my paper trail. Beneath the deed and hospital forms rested the letter my husband wrote the winter before he died. I had read it so many times, the creases were soft as cloth. The envelope split easily. The paper released a faint cedar scent. "Dear Nora," it began, "if you are holding this, I am gone, but I am not far. Hard days will come. You will be underestimated. Quiet strength is still strength. You do not need the room to approve. You only need to stand." I stopped there. The line I needed had already found me. I held the page to my heart, feeling the ring at my chest press against the words, as if the two were agreeing. I took both letters to the porch and sat where the boards remember our footsteps. The tide was halfway in, rolling with patient certainty. I thought about the celebration, the way the music stopped, the way the room tilted toward the truth. I did not feel victory. I felt alignment, the relief of something set right. Melissa has not called. Perhaps she will. I do not rehearse speeches. When she is ready to speak honestly, I will listen. If she tries to trade apology for access, I will refuse. Boundaries are not punishment. They are instructions for love. I folded Clara's note and slid it into the drawer with my husband's letter, the deed, and the rosemary. These are my anchors: paper, memory, and the sea. I brewed tea and let it steep until the color matched early sunlight. The mug warmed my hands as the morning lifted. Across the road, a couple walked their old dog. It paused to sniff the grass where my roses once stood. The sight made me smile. The garden will return when I am ready. I will choose hardy things that forgive neglect and bloom anyway. I have stopped asking whether I failed Melissa by making life too soft. The question is a tide that never brings me ashore. I did what mothers do. I gave, sometimes past wisdom. What remains is mine to tend. I will tend it with mercy for myself and clarity for her. A gull wheeled overhead. The water flashed silver. The horizon held steady. I spoke to the air, to the women who might recognize themselves. I said the line that threads through this. I did not shout. I let the truth speak. When I listened, I heard it say, "I am still here." If you have lived through something like this, if your generosity has been mistaken for consent, or your silence for surrender, know this: you are not broken. You may draw a line and still be loving. You may protect what you built without apology. Start small if you must. Lock one door, keep one key, save one letter, plant one rosemary sprig and watch it hold its green. I will rebuild, not as a monument to pain, but as a home for peace. I will hang new frames, and if some remain empty for a while, that is fine. The sea will keep its rhythm. I will keep mine. Some evenings I will sit with Clara. Some afternoons Margaret will bring news. Most mornings I will meet myself on this porch and practice steadiness. To those listening, I offer a final question. It is the one that turned the tide for me. If you have lived something similar, will you stay silent or will you stand up? Share with me in the comments and share with one another, because witnesses make us braver. I will be here by the sea, reading your words the way I read the waves, grateful for proof that light still finds its way home. I did not shout. I only let the truth speak. In the end, it was enough.